So I bought this pair of new brakes online and paid around $15 with free shipping. These brakes appear to be an inexpensive copy of Shimano's SLR-EV design of brakes. From what I can find, the least expensive model of this design of brakes from Shimano are these Shimano 105 brakes, which have an MSRP of $95 US, or in other words, more than 6 times the price I paid for the cheap ones. So in this video, I'll be taking a look at these $15 brakes and letting you know whether or not they're worth buying or just complete garbage. These brakes are classified as dual symmetric pivot brakes, and this technology was introduced by Shimano in 2012. By placing the pivots closer to where the braking force is applied, there's improved mechanical advantage, which they claim delivers 36% more braking power than their previous technology. A few years ago, I test rode a bike which had this style of brakes, and they seemed to work noticeably better than brakes I had tried on other modern road bikes. I bought these brakes with the intent of installing them on this bike to replace these old side pull caliper brakes, which are 2 generations behind these newer ones in terms of technology. With this design, both brake arms pivot from this point here, which is quite far from where the braking force gets applied, down here. I've never been very happy with the brakes on this bike, and always feel like I need to squeeze very tightly on the brakes when stopping. In contrast, this newer design of brake has separate pivot points for each of the 2 braking arms. And unlike the existing brakes, which relied on both arms pivoting from this central point, these 2 separate pivot points are significantly closer to where the braking force gets applied down there at the pads. So even though these new brakes appear to be just an inexpensive knockoff of Shimano's design, I'm optimistic that they'll still be an improvement over this old antiquated technology that I was using before. So after they arrived, I did a quick inspection as I was taking them out of the package. Despite all the bubble wrap, I noticed a few small paint chips, but that really doesn't matter to me. The ones I ordered are branded ZTTO AS2.6D, but I've seen others which look exactly the same with other branding marks. Out of the package, I quickly checked 2 things. Number 1, do the pivots have any play in them? Thankfully they didn't seem to. And number 2, do the brake arms pivot smoothly when the brakes are squeezed together? The first one seems to be not bad, but unfortunately the other one fails this test. After some investigation, I determined that the cause of this problem is that the surface where this upper roller is supposed to roll against has some rough ridges. You'd expect a contact surface like this should have been machined as part of their manufacturing process, but it looks like it was just cast and then painted. Nevertheless, I figured it would be a pretty easy repair, so I disassembled the brakes by removing this T25 Torx bolt. With a round needle file, I carefully removed the rough ridges from the rolling surface. After I'd removed all the high spots with the file, I followed it up with sandpaper, gradually working my way up to 600 grit, which made it smooth and shiny. Since these brakes are made out of aluminum, I'm not concerned about leaving bare metal here like this. I applied a small amount of grease here to hopefully help it roll even smoother. In retrospect, I realized this was probably a bad idea, since grease in this area of the bike will easily collect grit from the road, so I later wiped all the grease back off. Putting the brake back together was slightly more tricky than taking it apart, since I needed to counteract the force from the spring while reinserting the bolt. With everything back together, I repeated my earlier tests and was very pleased with the improvement. When comparing with the other brake, the one I worked on is noticeably smoother, so I decided to carry out the same procedure with this other brake too. So my intent had been that at this point in the video I'd install these brakes onto my bike and then report on how well they work. Unfortunately, however, I've discovered that these brakes are actually not compatible with this bike. As you'll notice when I remove the old brakes and insert the new ones, even with the brake pads positioned as far down as they possibly can go in this slot, they unfortunately don't quite reach the rim. The brake pads are hitting the tire instead of the rim. This is by no means a fault of these brakes. As I've now learned, the existing brakes which were on this bike are what are considered long reach brakes, which are really uncommon these days. The reach distance on these new brakes is much more in line with what's standard on newer road bikes. The page where I purchased these from clearly specifies what the reach of these brakes are, and it was my mistake for not checking this before ordering. The measurement that you need to make is from the center of this mounting hole here, down to the middle of the rim surface down here, where the brake pad will be touching. As long as this is within the range of 45 to 60 millimeters, this model of brakes will hopefully fit on your bike. So although my testing of this product was quite incomplete, here are some of my final conclusions. The operation that I did to the brakes using the file and sandpaper definitely seemed to make a big improvement in terms of making the brakes operate more smoothly. It's possible, however, that if I hadn't done this, that over time as the brakes were used and broken in, that they would have become smoother on their own, but I really can't be sure of this. Based on their appearance, it's apparent to me that these brakes were very inexpensively manufactured, but all the pivot points seem to be very accurately made because when I try and wiggle them, I can't feel any play in them whatsoever. When I ordered these brakes, I was expecting that the area where they differ most from the Shimano models would be in their weight. So I weighed mine, and although they are heavier than all of Shimano's equivalent models, the difference isn't very substantial. The only other notable difference in these brakes compared to the ones sold by Shimano is that they don't have a centering adjustment screw. This means that centering needs to be done by repositioning the whole brake on the bike, which to me doesn't seem like a very big deal. The area where these brakes seem to be the weakest are in the brake pads that they come with. The rubber feels really soft and cheap compared to most other brake pads I've dealt with. I don't see this as a big deal either though, because brake pads are a consumable part which can easily be replaced in the future. In fact, if you're using these to upgrade the brakes on your bike, you could take the brake pads from your old brakes and install them on here as long as the brake pads still have life left, which these ones do. So all in all, I think these brakes were well worth the price that I paid for them, and I would not discourage others from giving them a try as long as they have a bike which is compatible with them. So I apologize I wasn't able to give these brakes a proper test in this video, but I hope that some of the information that I shared was still helpful. I'm sure at some point in the future I'll have a compatible bike where I'll be able to install these, and hopefully I can make a follow-up video. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll look forward to reading your comments in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.